Commander Blake? Ma'am. His voice cut through the crowd like a blade. For a moment the entire ballroom froze. Champagne flutes paused midair. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The music died mid-beat. And there I stood, by the dessert table, in a gray thrifted dress, invisible, until the highest-ranking officer in the room turned to me and saluted. My sister's engagement party was supposed to be about her. Jenna Blake. Air Force Golden Girl. Everyone adored her. Everyone believed in her. I was just the ghost sibling. The one they never mentioned, the one they whispered about in kitchens after too much wine. They said I left the military, that I quit when things got hard. But none of them ever asked why I disappeared. None of them ever wondered how I survived. When I arrived that night, there wasn't even a chair for me. I sat near the back, next to a cousin who thought I was someone's plus one, while my mother floated around bragging about Jenna's fiancé, Lieutenant Colonel Drew Hunter, the man of honor, the rising star. No one noticed me. Not until his commanding officer walked in, scanned the crowd, and locked eyes with mine. Not until he broke formation, marched past the velvet ropes, and saluted like his life depended on it. That's when the whispers started. And I didn't have to say a word. My name is Rowan Blake. I'm 36. And I was once the commanding officer of a team that officially doesn't exist. I didn't come back for applause. I came back because truth has a pulse. And mine never stopped beating. Tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Because sometimes just knowing someone's out there listening means everything. And if you've ever felt unseen, unheard or erased, this story is for you. It's not about war. It's about the silence after. The next morning I woke up in a roadside motel that smelled like bleach and bad memories. A digital clock blinked 6:03 a.m. in red. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours. My boots hit the floor first, then the weight of what had happened last night caught up to me. The salute, the silence, and the eyes that followed me out like I just walked off a battlefield. I threw on my jacket, grabbed the keys, and drove the 10 minutes it took to reach my parents' house. Same pale blue siding. Same overwatered lawn. Same American flag still flying, even though no one in that house believed I'd ever earned the right to salute it. When I stepped out of the car, the heat clung to me like guilt. Colorado Springs in June wasn't supposed to feel like Florida humidity, but there it was, thick, heavy, suffocating. The driveway hadn't changed, but I had. 12 years ago, I left this place with nothing but a duffel bag and orders I wasn't allowed to explain. Now I stood there with nothing but questions and a name they still refused to say out loud. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She looked me over like I was a stranger with a clipboard. "You're early," she said, then turned around without inviting me in. Not hi. Not welcome back. Just, "You're early." I stepped inside anyway. The house smelled like lemon floor polish and a roast someone had probably overcooked. The same smell from every Sunday dinner growing up, when Dad would wear his uniform even if he wasn't on duty, and Mom would pretend we were perfect for the neighbors. Photos lined the hallway. Jenna in uniform, Jenna at the academy, Jenna on a mountain with Drew in full dress blues. No photos of me, not one. There used to be one. A photo of me in my deployment gear, arms crossed. Eyes tired but unbroken. It hung there until the year I stopped coming home for Christmas. Until the letters stopped. They never asked why. Never called. Just quietly took it down like a seasonal decoration that no longer fit the house. I wasn't a daughter to be missed. I was a chapter they didn't want to explain. Even my high school graduation shot had been taken down. Like I'd been erased on purpose. "Coffee?" my dad muttered from the kitchen without looking up. "Sure," I said. He poured it without sugar. Without milk, just like I drank it back when I used to eat breakfast at that table in silence. And maybe that's what hurt the most. They remembered how I took my coffee, but forgot everything else. I stood in the hallway a moment longer, just staring at that wall of photos. I remembered the day Jenna got her acceptance letter to the academy. Mom cried. Dad opened a bottle of wine. I was the one who ironed her first uniform. They never talk about that. They never talk about the night I left either. The night I walked out without saying goodbye because I wasn't allowed to. Because the orders in my hand came with a verbal NDA and a one-way flight. My sister came downstairs 20 minutes later in gym clothes, glowing like the military didn't touch her. She smiled at me like we were childhood friends catching up, not blood who hadn't spoken in nearly a decade. "So you're staying long?" she asked, as if we were comparing hotel plans. Not family history. I'm not sure, I said. Depends. She raised a brow. On what? I looked her dead in the eye. On whether anyone here still remembers who I really am. She opened her mouth to answer, but she didn't. And in that moment I knew. They had buried me long ago. And the only reason I was standing here now was because something was starting to claw its way back up. And it wasn't done with me yet. I didn't see Jenna again until the next afternoon. I was on the back porch, nursing a second cup of stale iced coffee, the kind that tasted more like regret than caffeine. The porch creaked under her steps before I even looked up. She was holding her laptop like it might explode. Rowan, can I ask you something weird? That was never a good opener. I nodded slowly. You already did, just by walking out here with that face. She sat across from me, lips tight. Okay. So I was working on this research project for my advanced policy seminar, Women in Combat Roles, the evolution of special access teams, you know. All that. I gave her a look. Cut to it. She swallowed. I logged into the internal archive. I was just trying to pull some documents for comparison. Most of it was redacted summaries or doctrine files, nothing special. But then something opened. She turned the screen toward me. The moment I saw the heading, my stomach dropped. Operation Dust Halo, classified level 7, access restricted, eyes only. My name was on the log file beneath it. Not as a reference. As the commanding officer. I stared at it frozen. That file wasn't just locked, it was buried under multiple layers of shadow clearance. Not even General Brass could open it without triggering the system's internal tripwires. What did you do after this came up? I asked. I panicked, she said. I took a screenshot, then the system crashed. It logged me out. I got a notice saying unauthorized access flag triggered. I didn't touch anything else, I swear. My throat felt tight. Jenna, listen to me. That file, it's not just private. It doesn't exist. She blinked. But it does. I saw it. And it had your name on it. And 6 others. I stood up. My hands were already shaking. How did you get into a level 7 archive with ROTC credentials? I don't know, she said. I thought it was a glitch. Maybe someone linked it wrong. No one in the Department of Defense linked wrong. A black operation buried under national security protocols. Someone had left that gate open. And Jenna just walked through it. I grabbed my keys. Where are you going? She called. To confirm we have a problem, I said. A big one. Back at the motel. I pulled the false bottom out of my travel case. Behind layers of clothes under a zippered lining was a hardened SSD wrapped in cloth and static casing. I slid it into my encrypted rig. One I hadn't powered up in years, and booted the offline command shell. As it whirred to life, my heart pounded. This was muscle memory I'd hoped never to use again. I ran a trace on the archive Jenna accessed. Sure enough, an internal ping had gone out not just to Pentagon logs, but to a private server cluster in Northern Virginia. That cluster was registered to a contractor known to liaise with congressional defense committees. And someone inside had already flagged the incident. They hadn't tried to cover it up. They were watching to see who noticed. Jenna hadn't triggered an accident. She triggered bait. I opened the Dust Halo log. Not the public summary. The raw one. Mission records. Debrief excerpts. Body cam stills. 6 names including mine. No photos. No medal recommendations. Just results. And right there, tagged in metadata, a new overlay I didn't recognize. Prepared for congressional review, Operation Dust Halo, case study, failure of integration strategy. Failure. They were going to use us as an example of why women didn't belong in Black Ops. And they needed someone naive enough to trip the wire for them. I sat back in the chair, pulse drumming in my ears. Jenna had no idea what she'd stepped into. But someone else did. And they were already writing our story for us, one where we were the mistake. Not the mission. Not the politics. Not the betrayal. Us? I stared at the line of code blinking on the bottom of the screen. Would you like to authorize visibility trace? Y/N. I pressed Y. If they wanted a witness. They were about to get one. The trace took 4 minutes. That's all. 4 minutes for a system buried under 10 layers of denial to respond to my clearance code, one that hadn't been used in over a decade. But it worked. The screen flickered once, then pulled up a shell window filled with redacted strings and tagged access logs. The most recent hit wasn't just Jenna. It was someone from inside the House Armed Services Committee. Name, Grant Wallace. Position, Senior Defense Counsel to Senator Harold Crane. I hadn't heard that name in years. But it hit me like a brick. Wallace was the assistant liaison during the dust halo approval chain. He was the one who pushed the limited oversight clause into the final draft. Back then, he was just another paper pusher in a suit. Now he was orchestrating the rewrite of our history. I leaned back in the chair. If Wallace had his hands on the dust halo file, he wasn't just building a case. He was building a weapon. One that would be used in a public hearing to dismantle everything we stood for and make sure no woman ever touched Tier 1 operations again. He didn't need the truth. He needed a scapegoat. And that scapegoat was me. I opened the backup drive and decrypted the core log cluster from our final mission report. Footage, audio, embedded biometric streams. Most of it would mean nothing to a committee. But one file mattered. 0416_storm_core. The original debrief uncut. Not the edited version the brass compiled. Not the one that blurred motives and glossed over betrayal. This one had everything. It showed how our team was misled by faulty terrain intel. How local forces who promised support backed out last minute. How we held the zone for 47 hours while tracking a mobile convoy across sandstorm-ridden flatlands. How I overrode the initial strike order because there were civilians in the target radius. And how, despite it all, we succeeded. But that wasn't the version being prepped for Congress. Theirs painted us as indecisive, fractured. Said our hesitation led to delays. That we cost lives because we didn't act like men in the same role would have. I could see the narrative already forming. An emotional decision-making model not suited for asymmetrical warfare. Bullshit. I exported the file, encrypted it twice, and burned it to a secure module. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Ellie Tran. She picked up on the second ring. Still sharp. Still quiet. I was wondering when I'd hear from you, she said. You heard about the breach? I asked. Everyone with clearance did, she replied. But only a few of us recognized the name they scrubbed out. There was a pause. You in trouble? She asked. Only if you believe I ever stopped being dangerous, I said. That made her laugh. I need a drop point. Secure. Encrypted handoff. I'm sending the real record. Storm Core, she said instantly. Yeah. Ellie whistled. That's gonna rattle cages. Good, I said. They've been too comfortable. We arranged the meet. Back Alley Cafe in Arlington 2 days later. Standard Ghost protocol. Handoff with blind confirmation, no digital trail. She'd distribute the truth through her underground journalistic network. Unofficial but trusted. Former operatives, military whistleblowers, civilian analysts. The kind of people who know the difference between a press briefing and a cover-up. I hung up and stared at the blank motel ceiling. My fingers were twitching again, the kind of tension I hadn't felt since the last time I loaded a rifle under blackout conditions. This wasn't just about vindication anymore. It was about preemption. They thought they could write me out of history. But they forgot one thing: I was trained to disappear. And that means I also know how to return. Untraceable. Unforgiving. Unstoppable. The next morning I drove 3 hours north, ditched my rental car, changed phones, swapped IDs. I became someone else. Not because I was hiding, because I needed to move faster than their attention span. While they were preparing their hearing, I was preparing the truth. And when the two collided, only one version would survive. The cafe was tucked between a laundromat and a locksmith shop. Both closed, both forgettable. That's why Ellie picked it. No one paid attention to a place where people didn't stay long. I arrived 10 minutes early. She arrived 5 minutes late. That too was on purpose. Ellie Tran hadn't aged the way most people did. The sharpness in her eyes was still there, though her hair was streaked with gray. She wore jeans, a canvas jacket, and no expression. You sure about this? She asked as she sat down. No, I said. But I'm done being erased. I handed her the encrypted module across the table under a folded napkin. She took it without flinching, sliding it into the inside pocket of her coat like it was a receipt. I'll burn it through 3 layers before it breathes, she said. You remember what's on it? Everything they don't want remembered. We sat in silence for a moment. The kind of silence that only 2 people who've seen the same ghosts can share. Then she said, they're not just rewriting history, Rowan. They're setting precedent. If they frame Dust Halo as proof women can't lead covert ops, they'll roll back 20 years of integration overnight. I nodded. That's why we hit first. Ellie stood. Give me 48 hours. When it drops, it'll be louder than their hearing room. She disappeared out the back. That night, I stayed in a hotel under a different name. I didn't sleep. Instead, I watched the countdown clock on my burner laptop. Ellie's system was clean. She protected better secrets than mine. But still, the hours dragged. At exactly 6 a.m., the message went live. Storm Core. Unedited. Unfiltered. Undeniable. It hit independent military watchdog sites first. Then it was shared by 3 former Pentagon advisors. By noon, it had reached major platforms, CNN, Reuters, even international defense forums. The footage was raw. Me ordering the strike pause. The camera catching a child running through the kill zone. My voice steady. Abort. Civilians in AO. Reroute engagement. It wasn't hesitation. It was humanity. And they had tried to label it failure. By late afternoon, Senator Crane's office issued a vague statement about unauthorized leaks of sensitive material. But it was too late. The public was watching. Veterans groups issued statements of support. Women in uniform started using the hashtag #StormCore on every platform they could. Former commanders and mid-level analysts began speaking up, quietly at first, then louder, emboldened by momentum. Ellie messaged me at 6:37 p.m. One line, they're scrambling. I could almost see it, the endless email chains, the calls made from encrypted phones, the press officers updating language every 10 minutes. Their machine was massive, but it was slow. And truth moved faster now. By nightfall, a retired general went on live TV. Commander Rowan Blake's decision saved lives. Period. You don't bury someone like that. You honor her. That clip went viral. The next morning, my name trended globally. Not as a whistleblower. Not as a ghost. As a leader. And for the first time in 12 years, I didn't feel like I was watching from the shadows. I was back in the light. And they were running out of places to hide. The summons came wrapped in polite language and legal muscle. An invitation to clarify details related to recent leaks at a closed-door congressional hearing. But they made one mistake. They put my name in the subject line. Not an alias. Not a number. Commander Rowan Blake. I showed up wearing gray. No medals. No uniform. I didn't come to perform. I came to speak. The chamber was colder than I remembered. Rows of suited staffers, military brass. And the ever-watchful press crammed into every available seat. At the center, Senator Harold Crane sat like a man convinced the ocean would part at his gesture. To his left, Wallace. The puppet master with clean fingers. Commander Blake, Crane began smoothly, you've created quite the stir. He leaned forward with a rehearsed smile. Would you like to make an opening statement? I nodded once and stood. I will, I said. And the room went still. I didn't come here to protect myself, I began. I came here to protect the truth. I looked directly at Wallace. For over a decade, my team and I operated under blackout protocols. No medals. No headlines. No funerals. Just results. I raised my voice slightly. Dust Halo wasn't a failure. It wasn't chaos. It was war. And we won. Crane cleared his throat. Commander, the concern here is that your team acted outside traditional protocols. I cut him off. We adapted. That's why we survived. If we'd followed the intel your office signed off on, we would have been killed in Phase 1. Gasps rippled. Crane blinked. There is no record of. There is now, I said. I turned and nodded to the aide sitting behind me. He inserted the drive. The monitors lit up. Body cam footage. Comms transcripts. My voice. Abort strike. Civilian in zone. Confirm reroute. My heart rate. Elevated but controlled. My team disciplined, responsive. The result. 0 civilian casualties. Objective secured. I let it play for 10 seconds before I spoke again. This is what leadership looks like. Not perfection, but responsibility. Crane shifted in his seat. You were never authorized to release these materials. I stepped forward, voice calm. I wasn't authorized to be forgotten either. And yet here we are. Murmurs stirred across the room. Cameras zoomed in. Somewhere in the back I saw Jenna sitting upright, eyes locked on mine. She didn't look scared anymore. She looked ready. Senator Crane folded his hands. So you admit that Storm Core was leaked by your directive? I looked at him like I was tired of playing human chess. I admit that the truth shouldn't need clearance. Silence fell again. Then a new voice broke through. A woman in a dark blue uniform. Brigadier General Madeline Reyes. I was the field operations auditor during Dust Halo, she said, standing. Everything Commander Blake just showed you aligns with the data I wasn't allowed to present 12 years ago. Wallace stood sharply. General, this is highly irregular. No, she said flatly. What's irregular is rewriting history to suit a policy agenda. The room erupted. Crane banged his gavel. Voice strained. This hearing is suspended until... Another voice joined in. Senator Harper from Oregon. I move that this committee immediately open an investigation into the suppression of Operation Dust Halo records. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The tide had shifted. By the time I stepped outside, the hallway was chaos, reporters shouting, aides rushing, cameras flashing. A young journalist pushed a mic forward. Commander Blake, how does it feel to finally be heard? I stopped. Looked straight into the lens. Before I could answer, an older man near the edge of the crowd raised his hand. A Vietnam veteran's pin on his lapel. Eyes rimmed in age and something quieter grief. My daughter served too, he said, just loud enough to be caught on camera. She didn't make it back. But if she had, I hope she'd have had someone like you to speak for her. I nodded once. No salute. No thank you. Just the quiet acknowledgement between two people who knew what it cost to disappear for your country. And what it means when someone finally sees you. I never needed to be loud, I said. I just needed them to stop pretending I didn't exist. And with that I walked down the corridor. Not hiding. Not haunted. Just whole. They didn't apologize. Not really. There were statements. Reviews. A quiet change in the footnotes of official documents. Adjustments in record classification. But no one ever stood at a podium and said we were wrong. And that was fine. I didn't need the world to bow. I just needed them to stop pretending I wasn't there. 3 weeks after the hearing, I got a letter. A real one. Paper. Handwritten. It came from a young woman in Georgia, an ROTC cadet. She'd watched the testimony in full twice. She wrote, I was ready to quit. I thought no one would ever believe someone like me could lead. But then I saw you stand there. And I realized silence doesn't mean absence. And maybe one day I'll stand there too. I cried for the first time in a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it healed. Storm Core became more than evidence. It became a conversation. It spread through defense forums, into ethics classrooms at military academies. I heard they even included a short clip in a course at West Point, Mission Integrity Under Pressure. They never used my name in the syllabus. But that was okay, because all across the country, a new generation of women, some in uniform, some still dreaming of it, were learning that value doesn't come with permission. That leadership doesn't need applause. Sometimes, it just needs to survive long enough to be seen. And sometimes that's enough. I visited Arlington a month after the hearing. I walked past the old statues, the silent graves. Past names I knew. And names I didn't. I stopped at a small new addition. Not a gravestone. Just a plaque. No fanfare. No rank. Just a line. Not every hero is in the frame. Some are the frame itself. That night, I sat on the same motel bed where this all began. The SSD was gone. The laptop wiped. No missions. No codes. No surveillance. Just me. Just Rowan. I had started as a ghost. A name no one dared to say aloud. Now they couldn't erase me again. And I wasn't planning on letting them try. 6 months later, Jenna and I met again. She brought coffee. Black. No milk. No sugar. I remembered, she said, handing me the cup. I know, I smiled. We sat on the back porch, the same one where she once showed me that laptop, wide-eyed and terrified. This time, no one was afraid. No one was hiding. We didn't talk about the hearing. Or the footage. Or the fallout. We didn't have to. We just watched the wind move the trees. A few weeks later, Jenna spoke at a leadership symposium for young cadets. She didn't say my name, but she looked every one of them in the eye and said, the strongest leaders I've ever known didn't chase attention. They carried the weight of silence. And sometimes they saved lives because of it. No headlines picked it up. But I watched the live stream. And I knew. She saw me now. Not as a ghost, but as the reason she'd never again look away from a buried truth. And let the silence say what words never could. Not all silence is cruel. Some silence is peace. And for the first time in years, I wasn't fighting it. I was resting in it. Later that evening, Jenna pulled out a small envelope. They sent this to your name, she said. From the Naval Records Office. Inside was a single certificate. No signature. No seal. Just 2 words printed in bold. Service acknowledged. I laughed. It was so formal it almost looped back to poetic. But I kept it. Not for proof, but as a reminder. Even the quietest victories still echo. And sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stay standing, no matter who tried to bury you. And keep walking.